So recently I predicted that Alan Wake 2 is going to be absolutely insane. And I guess I was right. Alan Wake 2, Remedy's first game since Control, which landed all the way back in 2019, has now landed, and as predicted by yours truly, has been a massive success critically. We definitely need time to relax this year because it has been banger after banger. From Jedi Survivor, we got Tears of the Kingdom, Baldur's Gate, Spider-Man 2, and now Alan Wake 2. We've definitely had a good year for games, I'll tell you that. Okay, so some of you may or may not know, but I recently played Alan Wake in preparation for the new game. The video's up on the channel. Overall, I enjoyed the game. I had positive thoughts. Game was good, story-wise, but the combat was a bit repetitive. But it did see the potential, and I'm happy to say that Alan Wake 2 has come out swinging, and oh boy, are Remedy on top of their game. So Alan Wake 2, it takes place 13 years after the events of the original game. It starts off with two FBI detectives. They're investigating a murder in Bright Falls. That's the setting from the original Alan Wake. Throughout the starting chapters, what happens is you play as a female FBI detective named Saga investigating these murders. You basically come to realize that shit isn't normal in the town and slowly find that Alan Wake, who went missing 13 years prior, has been a busy boy elsewhere. So I want to keep the video spoiler light for everyone. So if you haven't played the game, don't worry, I'll not spoil too much story-wise, apart from the first few hours in the game and then obviously some light spoilers on the systems. So starting off, let's talk performance. I'm currently playing on the PlayStation 5, so I can only really give my personal opinion on that console. But I do know a bit more about how Xbox compares thanks to Digital Foundry, and I'll touch on that. So as is the case with console games these days, you have two options. You can have quality mode or performance. Quality mode is a locked 30 frames per second, targeting 4K resolution. It has a dramatic effect on vegetation. It's a lot better than the 60 FPS mode. Personally, I'm not a fan of 30 FPS, so I just decided to go 60 anyway. The performance mode isn't perfect on PS5. It's basically upsampling to reach 1440p, and there's just minor drops here and there. It's nothing immersion breaking, but basically, from what I've seen online, the Series X actually does a better job most of the time, giving you a locked 60. So if you do have an Xbox and you're playing there, you should have a good enough experience. Okay, so how does it look? Well, I must say, look, next gen is definitely here because this game looks absolutely incredible. The visuals in the game are so far ahead of most games in recent years, and multiple times it just takes you back, you know, how realistic the game looks and feels. The people over at Remedy have incorporated mesh shaders that essentially give us next-gen geometry. It's basically much more detail in areas and objects. Pair that up with some fantastic global illumination that's on show here, and the game just looks miles apart from anything out there right now. So I'm a huge fan of movies, and the game's aesthetic and style here is what stands out to me because it reminded me of some of my favourite films. If you think about David Fincher's film Seven, it's a detective one with Brad Pitt from the 90s, and you mix that with some Chris Nolan-esque mind-bending world-building film, then boom, you've got Alan Wake 2, and it does it fantastically. So the starting chapters where you're playing as Saga and you explore the area around Cauldron Lake, where the murders took place, is so insanely accurate to real life visually that I couldn't help but can be completely enthralled with it. Even the sound design that's on show here is fucking insane. There's little details from hearing your footsteps in the puddle around the crime scene in the forest to the sound of Saga's jacket just rubbing off itself. It's just so engrossing. The details really just capture your attention. You are fully immersed playing the game. I really enjoy the world building, especially the very start in the forest. I'm not sure if it was in the first Alan Wake, but basically the area that you're in, Cauldron Lake, the whole kind of fairy tale folklore of the area is that it used to be a witch's cauldron that is now emptied, and obviously it kind of leans into it a wee bit. There is a witch's house in the area, but even from there there's a big tree called the Witch's Ladle, which is a huge tree, and obviously that's saying that it is the ladle for the cauldron. It's just great. I really honestly enjoyed that part and just learning about the area. It's just so more engrossing than you would get with a typical game. Now, I don't want to spoil too much, but you pair that up with the dual world mechanic and seeing the dark place, which isn't the place from Stranger Things, seeing how that looks totally different than the normal world visually. It's just so fucking cool. It's so unique in style. There's nothing else like it, and seeing it in a game and how it's done alongside it, really impressive. And even the game itself, it has little flourishes where it'll have kind of real world visual style overlapping the game, and it's just so fucking cool. Honestly, props to Remedy, because even from Quantum Break, this is obviously things that they've been building up to over time, but having that whole visual, real life game element overlapping, it's just so cool, and it's really, really well done, so props to Remedy for that. Now, as good as story or world building is, you at least need some decent gameplay to keep up with it. Some that's hopefully not too repetitive, like the original. I've seen Alan Wake 2 get some abuse online for being a walking simulator, and look, I don't mind those games. Fuck, I enjoyed Death Stranding. But no, Alan Wake 2 has a lot more going for it than just walking from point A to point B. So as the game begins and you start playing as Saga, I was really into it because it reminded me a lot of a TV show that I love that you should fucking go and watch right away if you haven't, True Detective. And I personally like point and click games, and when I was playing out the starting segments where you are Saga along with the FBI detective Casey, I think that's his name, I was so into it, you know, looking at the crime scene, investigating, all that type of shit I love. It actually gave me an idea. I would happily play this game if it was just a detective story the whole way through, that you're just looking at murder investigations, because that to me, it really appealed to me. I love that shit. Now, they have mixed the things up a wee bit more. Even when you're talking to characters in the game, there's kind of like text options where you can ask the next question, and there's clearly an option that progresses the story. So all that's done a lot different as well. But having that at the very start and learning about the area, mixing in with the kind of detective style, I was all for it. In terms of kind of the investigation style, looking at the murder, what they've actually paired it up with this time around is a case board room. It's kind of hard to say, but especially unique to this game. So what happens is, if you're on your DualShock, or DualSense I should say, I'm not too sure what the button is on your Xbox, probably the back button. What you do is you tap the touchpad and it transports you into a new room. And in that room, it has a case board, and on the case board, you'll have like a list of pictures. And what happens as you throughout your mission is you get kind of more information to put on the case board, and then you start plotting out what's happened with the case, how it's moving forward. And all this, it is a proper investigative game that was totally different than Alan Wake 1, and it's really, really fucking interesting. And that style of game really appeals to me, that paired up with the world building and the gameplay, and this is a fucking top tier game for the year. Potential game of the year contender, I'll put it that way. Obviously, as the early kind of chapters start progressing, it gets the real horror element going, and as a fan of all things horror, oh my god, this was such a fucking nice game to have and obviously play. Given the lack of horror games for the past 20 years, we've only really seen a big kind of a comeback ever since, you know, Resident Evil 7 in what, 2017, 2016? So it's really good that we're starting to get a lot more horror-oriented games. From Resident Evil, we're getting a Silent Hill 2, and now we've got this. And this obviously, like I mentioned before, like with Alan Wake 1, Alan Wake did remind me of Silent Hill 2 specifically. With this even further, it does give me that whole type of atmosphere. So props to them. The horror elements that do come into the game, holy fuck, they are good. Just watch this clip, because this, when it happened in real time, really, really fucking impressed me.
Something out of a horror story, but I had to keep going. None of this was real. It was all real.
There is obviously tonal shifts throughout where you play as Alan in some scenes and obviously Saga in the others. Alan's obviously in a dream world or the dark place, and the mechanics there are quite interesting, which I'm going to touch in just a second. But touching on a bit more of the gameplay mechanics, another thing that reminded me of Silent Hill in this game is the maps that you get throughout the game. So you'll get a map, and on the map it'll list obviously where things are and places that you've been in terms of items that you've seen. Very similar to what we had in the Resident Evil games recently. It's a great mechanic. It means you basically don't lose anything, but that's fantastic they're having that as well. Now, there is on the map circles of kind of points of interest, and when you go there, there's different types of unlocks. So for example, it could be something called a Word of Power upgrade. basically circles on the map allows you to basically go, and what you do is you flash a light on them and it gives you kind of an upgrade. Now what's good about this that I prefer is it funnels you into what to upgrade. So for example, one will be specifically for combat and you have to choose 3. One might be for health or your kind of person itself, and what that allows you to do is it kind of forces you to not be so specific on what you're leveling. Usually I will always go for kind of the same things in games, whereas this kind of allows me to flesh out my character more in terms of what I'm leveling up. I'm kind of buffing, as you will. Saga's chapters also have some kind of side kind of content or leveling mechanic in terms of lunchbox collectibles that you kind of find around the map. What I like about this that both do is I'm taking my time with it. I'm actually scouring the map looking for the upgrades, because the last thing you want to do is be underpowered going up against these enemies. Combat's typically similar to what we had in Alan Wake 1. You have a flashlight that, I'll tell you this, when Saga holds her flashlight, she holds it like a fucking baller. It looks unreal. But basically the same type of concept where you flash your light on enemies, it weakens them, and then you can carry out your combat. So I never had a problem with that in the original game. It was just more the repetition of the gameplay, which has been changed up here quite a bit. Makes me just a lot more happier. So I have no complaints with the combat, and obviously I like the whole leveling system. Obviously Saga with the lunchbox collectibles, they'll level up weapons and so on. Maybe you can get extra bullets and things like that. It just spices up the gameplay a bit and lets you explore. There is reasons to do that. I don't think I could do the video without touching on the Alan Wake segments in the Dark World, because it must be a year for multi-worlds, because like Lords of the Fallen, there is 2 dimensions at once. Like with the case scenes in Sagas with Alan's, you can go to a room, and what that room allows you to do is you can amend the story as you go. So for example, certain scenes that you can click a button on will change the scene outlay. So new areas open or new passageways open than before. And you also have a light mechanic where you stand under, say, a street light. You can take the light from that and it changes the world tonally completely again and giving you more areas. So just like Lords, this whole new dynamic of multi-worlds, it's fantastic. And that's something that I think couldn't have been done on last gen, just given the hard drives. So it's good to see this type of thing coming out, because they're so unique and new in terms of gameplay than what we've had ever before. Fantastic. And that's kind of the main thing with next gen that I think's understated. And look, if you haven't played Alan Wake 1, I don't think you need to play it to play this game. It definitely helps. I haven't played Control, for example, and I know that Control feeds into Alan Wake, especially with certain things that's already happened that I've noticed. But in terms of that, there is some callbacks. Obviously Bright Falls, the area itself, certain characters, some nice wee kind of tidbits, such as the jukebox having a note on it based on something that happened in the first game. And of course, the radio host is back with the radios on the levels that I hoped would still be here. But I think in terms of the game itself, I'm 10 hours in. I have a lot still to do, but I just wanted to get a video out because my early impressions are extremely positive. I will get a spoiler cast up after the fact, but in terms of the game itself, if you are wanting something different and you want to try something that maybe you haven't played before, honestly, and you are a fan of story, Alan Wake 2 is such a huge step up than the first game. And it's so unique compared to anything else out there. It is a game that you must play, and I think it's $49.99, which is a fucking steal. So look, if you are playing the game, let me know what you think in the comments below. But other than that, I'll see you next time.